And so what happens is you get this revolution, which is a new type of revolution, as it is pointed out here, that you get collectivism, um, oligarchy with collectivism, which of course is our first really sort of doublethink way. It doesn't work in traditional senses of the meaning. And so here you have the abolition of private property, which takes place in the 1950s. And in effect, that has a concentration of property in far fewer hands than before, which is the opposite of socialism. So there's an irony just in the way things actually happen. Collectively, the party owns everything in Oceania because it controls everything and disposes of products as it thinks fit. In the years following the revolution, it was able to step into this commanding position almost unopposed because the whole process was represented as an act of collectivization. It had always been assumed that if the capitalist class were expropriated, socialism must follow. So we've removed freedom and put the middle class in place. Factories, mines, lands, etc., everything's been taken away. And since these things were no longer private, it follows that it must be public. Which grew, and so it's just an ideal. It actually is only something that is manifested in definition of philosophy. It isn't actually happening that way, but it seems to be. It's an intriguing situation that has arisen. So what happens is we get an insight into how power is removed from people. And this manifesto suggests there are 4 ways in which power can be lost. That is, of course, it governs so inefficiently the masses are go into revolution. It is conquered. There's a discontent middle class, or of course it loses the will to govern. So any one of those become a problem, and if you can extinguish any of those, it gets into power permanently. So just in the world of 1984, of course, in the world of 1984, the first issue of conquering is completely removed from society because the 3 superstates don't need to conquer each other. All they need to do is be in a permanent state of war, and that comes later with Goldstein's manifesto as well. It continues on into describing the rise, of course, of the creature known as Big Brother. So here we have the sentence, at the apex of the pyramid comes Big Brother, who is infallible and all-powerful. Every act success, every achievement, every victory, every scientific discovery, all wisdom, happiness, virtue are held to issue directly from his leadership. Nobody has ever seen Big Brother. He has a face on the hoardings, a voice on the telescreen. We reasonably assume that he will never die. Therefore, as it's stated, Big Brother is the guise in which the party chooses to exhibit itself to the world. It isn't a singular human being. It is a gestalt, something that is representative to the outer party, as it were. It doesn't really affect the proles so much, but it certainly affects the behaviour of the party. And so Big Brother is only a representation, and a necessary representation to maintain power, as has been stated in the manifesto, that if we lose power through a troubled middle class, for instance, one way to keep them under control is to create the concept of Big Brother. As the manifesto goes on, it actually shows one of the issues we have with the concept of utopia and dystopia, in that in many ways they are one of the same. To have a utopia, it must in some ways have the quality of a dystopia and vice versa. Most people consider the world of 1984 to be a dystopia. But if you look to some of the ideals, they kind of have utopian backgrounds to it. For instance, admission into the inner party has got nothing to do with race, religion, or any other concept other than that these people take an examination at a certain age. Therefore, this is the most equal way a society can actually run. And because, of course, English is being transformed into Newspeak as the lingua franca, there is no longer a centralized way of thinking that is a dominant way of thinking for a native speaker, say of English or of French or whatever it is, to do well in those particular examinations. This is stuff that many people strive to as an ideal of perfection, and it is something that the inner party of the world of Big Brother have manifested as a key sense of idealism. Now again, it proves that this kind of concept works because once more Orwell makes reference to the everlasting power of something, an institution such as the Catholic Church, which is not based on hereditary class or an aristocracy, and so therefore, or a hereditary aristocracy, and therefore has actually lived for thousands of years. Whereas we get even socialism starts and begins with class privilege, as is pointed out here. And once you create oligarchies based on class privilege, it is unsustainable. Short term being, say, 200 to 300 years, perhaps. So as we get here, the party is not concerned with perpetuating its blood, but with perpetuating itself. Who wields power is not important, provided that the hierarchical structure always remains the same. And that's how it has become everlasting and completely successful, and therefore inescapable for Winston and people much like Winston. As the manifesto continues, it gets to the bit that I find is probably the most interesting to discuss in an English class, and that's the newspeak. A person who is naturally orthodox in newspeak, they call it a good thinker. This is where things become interesting in terms of language and how language perpetuates truth. And this is where I want us to focus for the next couple of lessons. So newspeak. Now, we've been talking about this a little bit, but it's imperative that we think about it when we're studying 1984. And in terms of our broader module, of course, it is important to realise that in the world of Metropolis, they are dealing with also language as a provocation to revolution, and their language is biblical, and they're hearkening back to the biblical. This language, of course, is hyper-modernity. And so let's look at one of the central tenets here. We've got here, the key word is black-white. Black-white. And it goes back here where it says Big Brother is omnipotent and the party is infallible. But in reality, of course, that can't be the case. And therefore, there is need for an unwearying, moment-to-moment flexibility in the treatment of facts. And this is where we get black-white. That is something that is not true can be true. You know, it means the habit of impudently claiming that black is white in contradiction to the plain facts. But if we're told or if we believe something is true, regardless of the known facts, we get this black-white concept. Now, in our time, this is kind of our post-truth way of thinking, where people say my opinion is more valid than someone's fact. My opinion still stands because therefore I feel this way. And this is something that, of course, Orwell is definitely presenting as a possibility, and it may seem to have come to pass. Now, if we get here, the whole concept that we really embrace is called doublethink. Okay? The alteration of the past is necessary for two reasons. One, which is subsidiary and, so to speak, precautionary. The subsidiary reason is that the party member, like the proletarian, tolerates present-day conditions because he has no standards of comparison. He must be cut off from the past just as he must be cut off from foreign countries, because it is necessary for him to believe that he is better off than his ancestors, etc. And so therefore you don't compare your life saying it was better in the old days, is what really is happening here. Getting rid of nostalgia. And in a lot of societies, particularly in totalitarian style societies, nostalgia is seen as a disease. It is seen as a mental illness to be nostalgic. And so that's what's being played on here. For to change one's mind or even one's policy is a confession of weakness. And we see that in our politicians quite often. And I think actually you could argue that this would have been the case definitely through World War II. You must be steadfast to be seen to be doing what is right. So when a politician these days changes their mind, even today, the media will call this a backflip. They'll say it's a backflip, as opposed to actually the politician being convinced by the group of people saying, you were wrong, change your ways, which is how democracy should work. But as soon as the politician actually changes their mind and says, I've changed my policy, immediately everyone says, he's backflipped or she's backflipped. And this is seen as a bad thing, even in our own media. So this is something that is a contingency on the context of what Orwell was writing, which is Western democracy based on the Westminster system of representational government must fail in this way. So because you end up with this political newspeak that's just going on here. So it continues on into deconstructing the language of 1984. And this can't be treated lightly when you're studying 1984. As is suggested down here, doublethink lies at the very heart of English socialism, since the essential act of the party is to use conscious deception whilst retaining the firmness of purpose that goes with complete honesty. That is, it is doublethink to even think of the word doublethink. It is doublethink to be in this situation. It's very important to deny the existence of objective reality and all the while to take account of the reality which one denies. All this is necessary, even in using the word doublethink. For using the word, one admits that one is tampering with reality. By a fresh act of doublethink, one erases this knowledge, and so indefinitely, with the lie always one leap ahead of the truth. The manifesto then sort of moves into almost a work of sociological philosophy. It starts to ingratiate how this society actually operates, how it thinks, how it works. It steps outside of the society and says, this is actually what they're doing. It almost has that anthropological sort of style to it. It's like we've come across a strange tribe with strange customs. The official ideology down here abounds with contradictions, and this is the bit I really like. It preaches contempt for the working class, and yet it dresses its members in a uniform which was at one time peculiar to manual workers and was adopted for that reason. It systematically undermines the solidarity of the family, and it calls its leader by a name which is a direct appeal to the sentiment of family loyalty. Even the names of the four ministries are a sort of impudence in their deliberate reversal of the facts. The Ministry of Peace concerns itself with war, truth with lies, love with torture, and plenty with starvation. These contradictions are not accidental, nor do they result from ordinary hypocrisy. They are deliberate exercises in doublethink, for it is only by reconciling contradictions that power can be retained indefinitely. In no other way could the ancient cycle be broken. If human equality is to forever be averted, if the high, as we have to call them, are to keep their places permanently, then the prevailing mental condition must be controlled insanity. We almost get to an uncovering here. We get this final thing, which is, there is one question, which is why? Why should human equality be averted, supposing the mechanics of the process have been rightly described? Here we reach a central secret. As we have seen, the mystique of the party, and above all the inner party, depends on doublethink. But deeper than this, the lies, the original motive, the never-questioned instinct that first led to the seizure of power and brought doublethink, thought police, continuous warfare, necessary paraphernalia to existence, and afterwards, this motive really consists ellipse. So again, we're held back from a slight truth. The curtain's only been pulled away in a small fraction. Okay, Winston gets a little bit of insight, but he says it's nothing he already didn't know, and so it kind of confirms for him his biases. And in many ways, this is probably why O'Brien has let him read this in any course of events.